Hello, everyone, and welcome to English Narratives Academy. Today, we bring you the story of Charles Darwin, a man who transformed from a curious young naturalist into one of the most influential scientists in history. His journey is fascinating, full of unexpected discoveries and groundbreaking ideas that changed how we understand life itself. In this story, we'll explore Darwin's early life, his famous voyage on the HMS Beagle, and how his observations led to his groundbreaking work on the origin of species. Written in simple and clear English, this story is perfect for learners who want to improve their language skills while enjoying an inspiring narrative.
Greetings, everyone. I am Charles Darwin, and I am here with you today in spirit to share the incredible story of my life. I will take you through my journey. Please listen carefully to my words. By doing so, you will not only discover fascinating details about my life, but you will also significantly improve your English listening skills. You will become more comfortable understanding spoken English and recognizing different sentence structures. Let's begin with my early life. Chapter 1. Early Life. Imagine a small, bustling town in England back in the early 1800s. That was Shrewsbury, my birthplace. The world was very different then. There were no cars, no electric lights, and no telephones. Instead, people traveled by horse-drawn carriages, used candles for light, and sent letters by hand. Our home was a large, comfortable house. My father, Dr. Robert Waring Darwin, was a very important man in town. He helped people when they were sick. I looked up to him very much. He was a thinker, a man who liked to know how things worked. My mother, Susanna Wedgwood, was from a family that made beautiful pottery. Sadly, she passed away when I was very young. This left a deep hole in my childhood. As a young boy, I was not one to sit still. I had a lot of energy, and I always wanted to explore. I loved going outside. The fields around Shrewsbury were my playground. I would spend hours looking at plants, catching insects, and collecting stones. I remember one time, I found a bird's nest in a tree. I carefully climbed up to see it. Inside were small, blue eggs. I was amazed. I watched the nest every day, waiting for the eggs to hatch. When the tiny birds finally emerged, I felt a sense of wonder. How did they grow? How did they learn to fly? These questions were always swirling in my young mind. Even indoors, I was always busy. I loved reading books, especially stories about faraway lands. I imagined myself traveling to those places, seeing strange and wonderful creatures. My imagination was a very active place. Collecting things was also a great passion of mine. My pockets were always full of interesting rocks, shells, and beetles. I liked to study these things, to see their shapes and colors. I wanted to understand how they fit into the world. My family noticed my curiosity. They saw that I was always asking why and how. Even if they did not understand my fascination with bugs and rocks, they were patient with me. Those early days in Shrewsbury shaped me in important ways. They taught me to love the natural world, to ask questions, and to always seek knowledge. It was in those fields and with those collected objects that the seeds of my future work were planted. The sense of wonder that I found as a child followed me through my life. Chapter 2. School Days and Disappointments. When I was old enough, I was sent to Shrewsbury School. It was a place with tall buildings and strict teachers. They taught us things like Latin and Greek. These were old languages, and I found them very difficult. I did not like memorizing rules and words that seemed to have no connection to the real world around me. The teachers wanted us to learn by heart, to repeat things over and over, but my mind did not work that way. I wanted to understand, to see how things connected. I was more interested in the birds singing outside the window than in the Latin verbs on the page. I remember one day we had to recite a long poem in Latin. I tried my best, but I kept forgetting the words. The teacher was not happy. He said I was lazy and careless. I felt ashamed. I knew I was not lazy, but I just could not focus on the things they wanted me to learn. Outside of the classroom, I was much happier. I spent my free time exploring the fields and woods around the school. I collected plants and insects, and I observed the birds and animals. These were the things that truly interested me. My father, Dr. Darwin, was worried about my lack of interest in school. He wanted me to have a good career. He thought I should become a doctor, like him. So he sent me to the University of Edinburgh to study medicine. Edinburgh was a big city, full of new sights and sounds. But the medical lectures were boring, and the operations were frightening. I did not like seeing people in pain. I felt sorry for them. I remember one lecture where a professor showed us a patient. He explained the illness and the treatment, but I could not focus on his words. I was thinking about the patient's suffering. I knew then that I could not be a doctor. My father was disappointed. He did not understand why I did not like medicine. He thought I was wasting my time. But I knew that I had to follow my own path. I needed to find something that I truly loved. Even though I struggled in school, I did learn some important things. I learned to observe carefully, to pay attention to details. I also learned that it is important to follow your own interests, even if they are different from what others expect. These lessons would be very important in my future work. My time at school taught me what I didn't want and helped steer me towards a natural world. Chapter 3. A Clergyman. My father, seeing my disinterest in medicine, decided a new direction was needed. He suggested I become a clergyman. This might seem strange, as my later work challenged many religious ideas. However, in those days, many scientists were also clergymen. It was a respected profession that allowed time for study and thought. So, I found myself at Christ College, Cambridge. Cambridge was different from Edinburgh. It was a place of quiet study and beautiful gardens. I felt more at home there. At first, I still struggled with some subjects, but I found that I enjoyed the natural sciences. I started to study botany, the study of plants, and geology, the study of rocks and the earth. I found these subjects fascinating. They were like solving puzzles, trying to understand how the natural world worked. One of the most important things that happened at Cambridge was meeting Professor John Stevens Henslow. He was a kind and wise man, and he became my mentor. He saw my interest in nature, and he encouraged me to explore it. Henslow was more than just a teacher. He was a friend. We would go on long walks together, collecting plants and observing animals. He taught me how to look closely at things, to notice small details. He taught me how to think like a scientist. He also introduced me to other scientists and thinkers. We would have discussions about the latest discoveries and ideas. These conversations were exciting and stimulating. They made me think about the world in new ways. I remember one day, Henslow told me about a book called Personal Narrative by Alexander von Humboldt. Humboldt was a famous explorer and scientist. His book described his travels in South America. I was captivated by his stories of strange plants and animals. I dreamed of seeing those places for myself. Then, Henslow told me about the voyage of the HMS Beagle. He said they were looking for a naturalist, someone to collect and study the plants and animals they found. He thought I would be perfect for the job. I was thrilled. This was my chance to see the world, to explore the places I had only read about. But my father was not so sure. He thought it was a dangerous and foolish idea. He wanted me to become a clergyman, not an adventurer. After some discussion, my father agreed to let me go. I was overjoyed. I knew this was a turning point in my life. It was a chance to follow my passion, to discover the secrets of the natural world. This was the start of a journey that would change my life and the world forever. Chapter 4. The Voyage of the Beagle. Imagine a small ship, the HMS Beagle, setting sail from England in 1831. I was aboard, a young man full of excitement and a little bit of fear. We were going on a long journey around the world. The ship was not very big. It was crowded with sailors, officers, and scientific equipment. The sea was often rough, and many people got seasick, including me. But I was determined to make the most of this opportunity. Our first stop was South America. It was a land of amazing sights. We saw a huge forest, tall mountains, and wide rivers. I explored the coast, collecting plants and animals. I found many new and interesting creatures. I remember one time we found fossils of giant animals. They were much bigger than any animals living today. It made me wonder what happened to them. Why did they disappear? We also visited the Galapagos Islands. These islands were very special. They were home to many unique animals, like giant tortoises and strange birds called finches. The finches were especially interesting. They had different beaks, depending on the food they ate on each island. I noticed that the finches on one island had big, strong beaks for cracking nuts. On another island, they had long, thin beaks for catching insects. It seemed like they had changed over time to fit their environment. This was a very important observation. It made me think about how animals adapt to their surroundings. It was the beginning of my idea about natural selection. The voyage was not always easy. We faced storms, heat, and difficult conditions. But I learned to be patient and to observe carefully. I filled notebooks with my observations and drawings. We traveled to many other places like Australia and New Zealand. Each place had its own unique plants and animals. I saw the diversity of life on Earth, and it was truly amazing. The journey was long, 5 years in total. During that time, I learned so much about the natural world. I saw how plants and animals lived, how they interacted with each other, and how they adapted to their environment. I also learned a lot about myself. I learned to be independent, to be resourceful, and to be curious. I learned that I loved exploring and discovering new things. Chapter 5, Returning Home. After 5 long years, the HMS Beagle finally sailed back to England. I was happy to be home, but also a little sad that my adventure was over. I had seen so many amazing things, and I was eager to share my discoveries. I brought back many boxes filled with specimens, plants, animals, rocks, and fossils. These were like treasures to me. I spent many hours sorting and studying them. I wanted to understand what they told me about the world. London was a busy city, full of scientists and thinkers. I started to meet with them, showing them my collections and sharing my ideas. They were interested in my findings, especially the finches from the Galapagos Islands. I began writing books about my voyage. I wanted to tell people about the places I had seen and the things I had learned. I wrote about the geology of South America, describing the mountains and volcanoes I had observed. I also wrote about the animals I had collected, describing their unique features. But my most important work was thinking about the question of how living things change over time. I spent hours looking at my specimens, comparing them, and trying to find patterns. I read books by other scientists, trying to understand their ideas. I knew that something important had happened on the Galapagos Islands. The finches with their different beaks showed me that animals could change to fit their environment. This was a big idea, and I wanted to understand it better. I started to think about how animals and plants compete for food and resources. I realized that the strongest and best adapted creatures were more likely to survive and have babies. This was the beginning of my theory of natural selection. Returning home was not just the end of the journey. It was the start of a new one. It was the beginning of my life as a scientist, a life dedicated to understanding the wonders of the natural world. Chapter 6. The Theory Takes Shape. After returning from the Beagle voyage, I spent years carefully studying my specimens and thinking about what I had seen. The finches from the Galapagos Islands kept coming back to my mind. Their different beaks, each suited to their food, were a puzzle I needed to solve. I began to develop a theory, a way to explain how living things change over time. I called it natural selection. It's a simple idea, but it took me a long time to understand it fully. Imagine a group of animals. Some are stronger, some are faster, and some are better at finding food. These animals are more likely to survive and have babies. Their babies will inherit their good qualities. Over many generations, the animals will change. The strongest, fastest, and best adapted animals will become more common. This is natural selection. Nature selects the best animals to survive and reproduce. This idea was very different from what people believed at the time. Most people thought that God had created all animals and plants exactly as they are. They did not believe that living things could change. I knew that my theory was controversial. I knew that many people would disagree with me. But I also knew that it was based on solid evidence. I spent years gathering more evidence. I studied fossils, the remains of ancient animals. I saw that animals had changed over time. I also studied how farmers breed animals and plants. They select the best animals and plants to have babies, and over time, they create new varieties. I bred pigeons myself. I saw how different varieties of pigeons could be created by selecting which birds to breed. This showed me that animals could change through selection. I wrote a book called On the Origin of Species. It was a long and detailed book explaining my theory of natural selection. I wanted to present my ideas clearly and carefully. Writing the book was a difficult task. I had to explain complex ideas in a way that people could understand. I also had to address the many objections that people might have. I knew that my book would cause a stir. I knew that it would challenge people's beliefs. But I also knew that it was important to share my ideas. I believed that my theory could help us understand the natural world in a new way. The theory took shape slowly, piece by piece. Observations, experiments, and a lot of thinking combined to create a new way to see the living world. The journey to understand natural selection was long and full of challenges, but it was a journey I felt compelled to take. Chapter 7. The Impact of Origin. When my book, On the Origin of Species, was published in 1859, it was like throwing a stone into a calm pond. The ripples spread far and wide, causing waves of discussion and debate. The book explained my theory of natural selection, the idea that living things change over time through a process of adaptation. This idea was very new and challenged many traditional beliefs. Many scientists were excited by my book. They saw that it provided a new way to understand the natural world. They used my theory to explain many things that were previously mysteries. They began to study evolution in more detail, finding more evidence to support my ideas. However, not everyone was happy. Many people were shocked and upset by my book. They thought it contradicted the Bible, which teaches that God created all living things in their present form. They saw my theory as a threat to their religious beliefs. There were many debates and arguments. Some people gave speeches and wrote articles against my ideas. They said I was wrong and that my theory was dangerous. They worried that it would lead people to lose their faith in God. Others defended my work. They said that science and religion could coexist, that my theory explained how God's creation worked. They argued that understanding evolution could help us appreciate the wonders of nature even more. The book was translated into many languages and read all over the world. People in different countries had their own reactions. Some were fascinated, some were skeptical, and some were angry. I received many letters from people who had read my book. Some were full of praise, saying that my work had changed their understanding of the world. Others were critical, pointing out what they saw as weaknesses in my theory. I was pleased that my book had sparked so much discussion. Even the criticism was valuable, as it helped me to refine my ideas and address the concerns of others. The impact of Origin was not immediate. It took time for people to fully understand and accept my theory. But over time, more and more scientists and thinkers embraced the idea of evolution. My book changed the way we think about life on Earth. It showed us that we are all connected, that we share a common ancestor with all other living things. It showed us that life is not fixed, but constantly changing and adapting. The ripples from Origin continue to spread today. My theory of evolution is still being studied and debated. It remains a fundamental part of our understanding of the natural world. Chapter 8, Personal Life and Family. While my scientific work was demanding, I also had a rich and fulfilling personal life. In 1839, I married my cousin Emma Wedgwood. She was a kind and intelligent woman, and we had a happy and loving marriage. We had 10 children, although sadly, some of them died young. Emma was a great support to me. She helped me with my work, read my manuscripts, and offered her thoughtful comments. She also created a warm and loving home for our family. I loved spending time with my children, playing games, reading stories, and exploring the countryside. I tried to instill in them the same curiosity and love for nature that I had. Our home, Down House, was a place of peace and tranquility. We had a garden where I could observe plants and animals. We had a study where I could write and think. I was not a man of great social ambition. I preferred the quiet life, the company of my family, and the pursuit of knowledge. Chapter 9, Later Years and Legacy. As I grew older, my health began to decline. I often felt tired and unwell. But even though I was not as strong as I used to be, I continued to work and think about the natural world. I kept writing books, expanding on my theory of evolution. I wanted to answer the questions that people had asked about my work. I also wanted to explore new ideas and discoveries. I wrote a book called The Descent of Man, where I discuss how humans evolved. I showed that humans are also part of the natural world, and that we share a common ancestor with other animals. This idea was even more controversial than my first book. I also studied plants and animals in my garden. I loved to observe them closely, to see how they lived and interacted. I wrote books about the movements of climbing plants and the formation of vegetable mold by worms. I was happy to see that my theory of evolution was gaining acceptance. More and more scientists were using my ideas in their research. They were finding more evidence to support my theory. I was also pleased to see that my work was having an impact on other areas of study. Philosophers and writers were thinking about the implications of evolution for human society. They were discussing how evolution could help us understand ourselves and our place in the world. Even though I faced criticism and disagreement, I never gave up on my work. I believed that my theory was important and that it could help us understand the natural world in a new way. I died in 1882 at the age of 73. I was buried in Westminster Abbey, a place where many important people are buried. This showed that my work was considered very important. My legacy is the theory of evolution by natural selection. This theory has changed the way we think about life on Earth. It has shown us that all living things are connected and that they have changed over time. My work has also inspired many other scientists to study evolution. They have continued to explore the mysteries of life and to find new evidence to support my theory. Even today, my theory is still being studied and discussed. It is a fundamental part of our understanding of biology. It helps us to understand how life has evolved and how it continues to change. My legacy is not just about science. It is also about curiosity, observation, and the pursuit of knowledge. I hope that my work will inspire others to explore the wonders of the natural world and to ask questions about the world around them. My life's work was to show the world the beauty and wonder of how life changes, and that all life is related. Chapter 10, a simple message. If I could give you one simple message, it would be this. Be curious. Ask why and how. Explore the natural world around you, even the small things. Read books, learn new ideas, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. They help you grow. Think for yourself. Question what you see and hear. The world is changing, and you can be part of discovering new things. Never stop learning. And remember that all living things are connected in a wonderful way.